telling the good news of Jesus Christ. Every guest, every person has been touched by the goodness of God. That's why we're here. Amen. We are here with someone else that wants to declare how good he is and let us know all about what has happened in his life. Pastor Yves McKenzie of Disciples of Christ Christian Ministries. You know, I'm telling you, with a name like Camy, I am extremely cautious as to how I pronounce somebody's name. I have gotten so many different names thrown at me, and I know you know it. Yes, sir. Man, welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. We've been talking with everybody. You know, whenever we get on Atlanta Live, there seems to be this kind of through line that begins to happen, and you start seeing a perspective of God speaking. Talk to us, because right here, you know, you're dealing with Disciples of Christ Christian Ministries, and that's something that's dear to our hearts. And as you can really listen from the beginning of the show to now, there's been that kind of through line. Talk to us about the name, first of all, that God gave you and what's become because of that.
In giving the name of the church, one of the things that God shared with me, so many people say that we got members, so many people say we got parishioners, and God said all I ever asked for was disciples. That's all I ever asked for was disciples. And so when he began to enlighten me with that, I began to say, God, he said all I need is disciples. Yes. And so what we begin to say is we are disciples who disciple disciples to disciple disciples. That's the whole purpose of it. We're not trying to build membership, but make membership count in the aspect of just being disciples.
Okay, now I want you to know, if you're listening out there and you heard that, you can go home, read your Bible, and actually get somewhere.
Amen.
You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
And that's the bottom line. And I think that we're missing that. And, you know, God's been really working on us as we're going through the process of teaching and reteaching those principles of discipleship. Give us a perspective of how God is leading the congregation through your understanding of what that means to be a disciple.
Well, what we're dealing with in our ministry, and the thing that God, over 27 years of ministry that I'm in, he's redoing some things in my life and saying, Yves, what I want you to do is to teach people about servanthood. Teach people about servanthood. And what God has been sharing with me is that so many people, in order to be a good servant, you have to serve without an agenda. So many churches and so many people serve with agendas. And so because their agenda is off, church is now just built and expanded, but then there's no fellowship. And in order for us to be good servants, so once he told me about that, Yves, serve without an agenda. And so that means when I say go, you don't question why and where. You serve without an agenda, that your availability affords you the aspect of going. When I say do this, even though this is your plan, because you're serving without an agenda, you step aside your plans and then operate in what I'm asking you to do, because you're serving without an agenda. And so many churches, even our leaders and so many people, they're serving with agenda, saying this is what I want to do with ministry, this is what I want to do with my family, this is what I want to do with my life. And God said, I'm not concerned about any of that. Serve without an agenda, and I can accomplish everything that I need to and get you towards your destiny.
Good stuff. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here listening to it because I know that God has given me a word to declare. And it's funny because as you disciple others, you know, are driven. Your fiber moves by that same word when you hear it through someone else, because it's bubbling. It's fire.
Yes.
You know, I love the fact that men of God are beginning to really understand that we have to get back to the foundational aspect of what we were left here to do, what the Great Commission really is, as opposed to just opening new doors and making new churches and they're all the same stuff, back to a synagogue system. When you deal with that kind of a word, though, you kind of tick some people off.
You get real popular.
You kind of, you know, I was talking to Coach Pierce, and I was saying to him that, you know, from the perspective of discipleship, people love to hear about John the Baptist, but they don't like him to show up. You know, they like to hear about Jeremiah, but they don't like him to show up. Because when you get to that point, you're dealing with a hard word that's about really bringing heaven to earth, as opposed to just being everything that people see. Talk to us about what you see happening, because again, in the movement of God discipling you to disciple other disciples. What's that track record? What's going on there? What do you see happening in men's heart?
And one of the things that I shared with my church some years ago, and I just believe it, and like you said, it'll make people upset. I'm like Coach Pierce. It'll make people upset and hopefully agitate them enough. But if you put some clothes in the washer, in order to get it clean, it has to be agitated. And what I begin to tell the church is what God shifted me to doing is some of us as ministers, men of God, women of God, 9/11 was a wake-up call for us. And so many of us dropped the ball.
That's right.
We enlarged our territories. We enlarged our churches. But it was the opportunity for us to go back and serve the people, go back and get out there. And we dropped the ball. We picked up the ball and got big churches. We're doing good. Churches are wonderful. Ministry is wonderful. But again, the people are hurting. And once we filled our churches, again, we forgot about the people that God called us to. And he's saying, I don't want you to miss the ball again, Yves. I'm giving you this opportunity so that you can minister. So now, in you having a servant's heart, that means going out. It doesn't take a lot. I shared with some people a couple of weeks ago. It doesn't take a lot to feed the homeless. You have to have a servant's attitude.
Right.
We have all of these wholesale places now. You can take your card, swipe it. Hot dogs, 100 in one box, only cost you $10.
Right.
You can really go feed somebody, but if you don't have the servant's heart or the servant's mentality or that person being available to God, you'll say, well, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough this. I don't have enough that. But servanthood says, okay, I can go buy that 100. They're not, a lot of people when you're ministering, they're not concerned so much as the packaging. They just want to be delivered. They just want to be taken care of. And we're so worried, oh, we got to have this done. We got to get the chandelier. We got to paint this right. We got to have the right carpet. God said, all I need you to do, and in our little, as I tell people, we're a storefront with a steeple worship. We're not concerned about all of the other aspects. Just give them a place to worship so that when you get them to that place, then you can go ahead and feed them. So the track record is, if we get back from 9/11 and say, God, I want to get back to that place because everybody came to church. No matter what television show, the broadcasters, everybody was talking about Jesus. I want to get back to that place. And you mentioned, I want to get back to where it says, return to your first love. How did you feel when you first got saved? Couldn't nobody talk you out of Jesus? Every other word, every other analogy you had was about Jesus. Now, again, we've waned from that. God said, I want you to get back to that. And in being a servant, I go back to talking about Jesus.
This is a conversation we have had so many times before. But why is it that our butts have to be on fire before we stop? I'm just gonna say that.
Cut to the chase.
That is me. But we've got to not wait for a 9/11.
Exactly.
And we've got to live as disciples all the time, so that servant happens, so that someone gets to receive him and become a disciple.
Right.
So as you step out of the four-wall church and speak this, what are you receiving?
I'm receiving. It depends on the people. To the people that I'm ministering to, they're receptive. To the ones that figure that they've already got theirs together and, well, we've done that. We've tried that. And the God said, again, shake the dust, keep on going. If they don't receive it, then it's all right. And I come from the aspect of telling them, because even in myself, like Jolanda and everyone talked about before, is being able, God shared with me Mephibosheth years ago. And I began to counter myself as Mephibosheth when he was brought, therefore, and he was dropped from his youth and felt lame on both of his legs. And God said there are several of us, like Pastor Walker said, and therefore we feel that we're inadequate. We feel that we don't have anything to offer, and we deal with so many things. Therefore, Mephibosheth was dropped and lame, felt like he had nothing to offer anybody. But the promise that he made to Jonathan was that you will be able to eat at the king's table continually. Not only you, but your children. And I began to look at that and say, God, how long will I have to suffer? How long will your people have to suffer? And God said, remember, if nothing else fail, the promise. And so David came back and said, how can I show kindness to someone in John? How can I show? And Ziva said, there's someone who has been lame from his youth. And he said, I'm going to bestow kindness upon you. I'm doing what God called me to do, whether it bless me now or bless me later. If I have to be lame doing it, the promise is still going to be made.
That's
and
right.
so Mephibosheth kept going and doing what he needed to do until the promise was fulfilled.
You know, I hear so clearly in that too, you know, from the perspective of the fact that we know how God works. We see it in the scriptures over and over again. He said there's nothing new under the sun. He just, you know, the issue is that for us, we have to discover it. But the reality is it's already been written. It's already been done. And so I hear in that the raising up of a remnant, raising up of those with God's heart, causing to come into favor and come into manifestation and being of those who are actually willing to not do it the world's way, the religious way, the way that seems right to a man, but to do it the way that God has prescribed. In the process of now discipling men in the church itself, in your congregation, talk to me about that lateral perspective of pastors. You know, what are you finding in the leadership? Is the heart there to turn back to that first love, to fulfill the first works that God said, go do this? Or is it a continual holding on to what they have already built? Just like as Jesus found with the Pharisees. What are you finding amongst the pastors?
In some, again, speaking for some, I begin to share with some pastors and even the congregation, the scripture is being fulfilled. I'm not trying to change everything. The Bible declared that there will be some that will turn away to their own sound doctrine. So therefore, I'm looking at the aspect, I can only do what God called me to do. Those pastors who build themselves graven images of themselves, and so therefore I can't do anything about that. I can't tarnish that, can't melt that. All I can do is turn everyone back to Jesus, who God's charted on my path. For those, there are some, and what I find, honestly, mostly, not saying anything against the larger ministries or larger churches, but it has always been in my aspect of growing. The smaller churches have always been for the community, and so those are the ones that are in the trenches. And what God shared with me is, if you look at soil, it's the springtime. If you look at soil, sometimes that which was underground pushes the flower, and all we see is the flower. We smell the rose. But what God is saying, in this day and time, I'm now turning over the topsoil. And that which was pushing before to make it look so good, now I'm turning it over. And that which was on top, it's now getting ready to be on the bottom. Not in a sense of going down, but now that which was pushing other folks' ministry, those who were pushing other folks' song ministry and churches, I'm now raising up those people who nobody knew nothing about. Those people who were in other cities saying, I never heard of them. God said, I heard of them, and I knew that. And so now he's expanding ministry to say, I'm using them, those who are available to me.
Right. That's awesome. You know, I think what happens too is, you're dealing with the whole David perspective, and for the Davids that have been out there taking care of the sheep, for the Davids that have been out here doing the little things, the small things, what men consider the small things, and you find yourself walking alone. You find yourself, smelling like, the dirt and everything else, and not having the funds and not having this, all of those kind of things that you've gone through. It is a David perspective. Yes, there has been a Saul. Yes, there have, but you've been faithful, and so it's important that word that you just spoke is heard by the pastors, because again, I have a heart for leadership. The pastors need to understand, yes, you have been out there and you've been in the trenches and you've been doing the work. Yes. But God knows you. Yes. God knows you, and it's going to be all right. And they have to continue to be faithful. That's right. Amen. Yes. Bro, all I can say, man, is that your declaration, your perspective is encouraging. Yes. It is. I am glad that I came tonight. Amen. Amen. To hear another brother talk about what's important to the heart of God in discipling his people and having to put away whatever needs to be put away in self to fulfill that. Yes. Please continue. And doing what God gave you to do. We love you, and if there's anything that we can do to help you disciple God's kingdom, you call on us. That's what it's all about. Now, this is Atlanta Live. This is the whole point. It's not about just getting saved. It's not about just, receiving Jesus. It's about now being discipled into the image and likeness of the Christ. Stay with us, Carrie Davis. I won't complain. We'll be back.